It begins at Land's End. Once, the land was ruled by the ancients, a people whose power and knowledge surpassed even death itself. Little is known of ancient culture or tradition, but it seems they were a prosperous people, with but one ever-looming threat to that prosperity: the Blight. The Blight's true nature is dubious, but it seems to have existed for as long as the ancients themselves dwelt upon the land, if not longer. The Blight corrupts all that come into contact with it, fueled by sorrow and rage. Those afflicted by the Blight are twisted into horrific, immortal beings, creatures overcome with the desire to simply kill or destroy all in their path. In some cases, the Blight may even fuse the afflicted together, creating hybrid abominations with even greater strength. But for as fearsome as the Blight was, it was not without opposition. Though those afflicted by the Blight could not be killed by ordinary means, there were those born with the ability to purify it, the White Priestesses. These women, identified at birth by the red markings on their foreheads, could absorb Blight into themselves without losing their minds to it. Though the afflicted could never return to what they once were, the priestesses offered hope for those who yet remained, and solace to the souls who otherwise knew no rest. This power, however, was not without cost. Though a White Priestess seemed immune to the corrupting effects of the Blight, it could nonetheless take a serious toll upon their bodies. The more Blight a White Priestess absorbed, the faster their health would decline. To combat this, the ancients used the Aegis Curio, a mysterious pendant with the power to ease the suffering of priestesses during the purification rituals. Indeed, the White Priestesses were held in highest regards by the ancients, so much so that only the most elite among them were permitted to perform the Deathless Pact. Through this necromantic rite, an ancient warrior would swear their body and soul to a priestess, becoming immortal so long as that priestess's bloodline endured. And so it was that the Deathless Knights would combat and subdue the Blighted, while a White Priestess would purify them with the Aegis Curio in her possession. In time, the scourge that once threatened the ancients was reduced to little more than a triviality. However, a day would come when the ancients would face a foe far more formidable than the Blighted, and their seemingly infallible empire would come to an end. From across the sea, strangers arrived. Where they came from or why they traveled to this continent, we can only speculate. Indeed, the events surrounding their arrival are almost entirely unknown. But whatever purpose brought them here, the ancients met the strangers with hostility. The stranger's king writes in his diary that although attempts were made at a peaceful resolution, in the end, a conflict between his people and the ancients was inevitable. At first, the battle was one-sided. Though the strangers outnumbered the ancients, that meant little in the face of the Deathless Knights, who could shrug off mortal blows and rise again to keep fighting. So long as the White Priestesses remained in a safe place, the ancients' army could never truly be beaten, or so it seemed. Indeed, the strangers were quick to adapt. Their soldiers could not kill the Deathless Knights, so their mages opted instead to contain the immortal soldiers. Through magics of their own making, the strangers were able to overcome the Deathless Knights and push back the ancients' forces. From there, slowly but surely, a society that had seemingly lasted for ages would crumble away, and the ancients themselves were driven to near extinction. Or so it would seem. After the war, the continent was divided into 6 nations, and the king of the First Age was given reign over the snowy regions at the northern edge. Thus, the Kingdom of Land's End was born. In spite of the environment, the nation rose to prominence, building mighty castles and bustling townships. The first king oversaw all of this, though the horrors of war continued to plague his mind long after his victory. Indeed, The first king lamented the fact that he had never found a way to coexist with the ancients, and that his people's prosperity came at the cost of theirs. Perhaps that is why, on one fateful day, the first king saved a child's life. For reasons unknown, the first king ventured into the Deadlands, only to discover a young girl with pale skin and white hair. There was no mistaking it. This girl was an ancient, the remnant of the White Priestesses believed long extinct. In spite of this, the girl silently clung to the king, her pleading eyes meeting his own. Be it an act of mercy, atonement, or perhaps even madness, the first king allowed the girl to return with him, to find solace in the kingdom built atop the remnants of her people. Not long after, the Blighted came. The ancients, or what remained of them, emerged from beyond the horizon under the influence of their ancient foe. Driven by Blight, they cut down all who stood in their path without mercy or remorse, and threatened to bring ruin not just to Land's End, but the nations beyond it as well. Perhaps in a cruel twist of fate, the people now had only one hope to fend off this new threat, the child of the enemy they fought so hard to eradicate so many years ago. Her name was Nymphalia, and she would become the first White Priestess of Land's End, the White Priestess of the Dawn. The people quickly turned to Nymphalia for salvation. Her power, the power to purify the Blighted, was seen as something akin to divine. Many of the old religions of Land's End began to die out as the White Parish rose in prominence. However, without the Aegis Curio in her possession, Nymphalia would slowly succumb to the blight in her body with every soul she purified, while the blight showed no signs of halting its spread. Though Nymphalia's ultimate fate is unknown, she left behind two gifts before her passing. The first is her ring, found at the bottom of a lake near the kingdom's edge. The other was her daughter, the White Priestess of the Wind. Little is known about the White Priestess of the Wind. Her name, her face. Nearly all information about her has seemingly been lost to time. A monument built by the hulking warrior Sir Garrett implies that she once fought alongside the king's armies to purify hordes of Blighted. In honor of her deeds, and the warriors who fell defending her, the twin spires were raised on the snowy outskirts of the kingdom. All we can say for certain is that, much like her mother, she served Land's End by purifying the Blighted that threatened to overcome it. In the White Parish, a statue was erected of her alongside one of Nymphalia, though time has been less kind to Wind's visage. By this point, the White Priestesses had become every bit as significant to the people of Land's End as they had been for the ancients. However, with most of their bloodlines killed off and the Aegis Curio lost, that purifying power was in precious short supply. The most elite warriors of the kingdom were assigned to the White Priestesses of each age as guardians. But the Deathless Pact, too, was little more than a remnant of history now. Indeed, these warriors were no deathless knights, but were nonetheless tasked with devoting their lives to protecting the White Priestess. Years passed, and the Blight continued to ravage the kingdom. The White Priestess of the Wind perished, be it to sickness or age, but not before ensuring her legacy could continue. Freysia, the White Priestess of the Fount, was born near a spring at the far edge of the kingdom. Like her mother and grandmother before her, Freysia inherited the task of purifying the Blight, though the new king of Land's End was no longer content to leave his nation's fate solely in the hands of the White Priestess. Deep within the forest dwelled the Coven, an institution of magical research founded by the witch Aline. The Coven studied all manner of spellcraft, including artifacts uncovered from the ruins of the ancients. Aline herself appears to have lived since even Nymphalia's time, as she once wrote of having aided multiple White Priestesses before that of the Fount. Even so, Aline and Freysia formed a fast and special friendship, but theirs is a tale for another time. The king, desperate to find a more effective means of fighting the Blight, began recruiting mages from the Coven for his own King's Mage Brigade. Led by a man named Phaedon and his beloved Miriel, this group was wholly dedicated to researching the Blight, and to that end, were given leniency to do whatever they desired in pursuit of that research. Their lab was to be set in the Verboten Domain, located beneath a prison complex known simply as the Stockade. From this prison, the mages of the King's Mage Brigade were granted test subjects among the Stockade's death row inmates. To ensure the secrecy of this affair, the king ordered the cooperation of the Dark Executioners, secret assassins who also served as, executioners within the Stockade. Leading this unsavory group was a man named Hainer, who loved his kingdom above all else. For this reason, he was endlessly loyal to the king, only defying his master once in his life. For you see, the king had an affair, with Hainer's own sister nonetheless. Between them, an illegitimate child was born. His name was Julius. Julius's mother passed when the boy was still young, and so, even though it went against his order's code, Hainer took it upon himself to raise the boy. Eventually, Julius learned of his true origins, and sought to earn the king's approval by rising up the ranks of the royal knights. It was during this time that the Blight began to fester more than ever before. A horde unlike anything seen in ages encroached upon Land's End, led by a massive creature that the people called the Blighted Lord. Whether this being was the original source of the Blight, or merely the apex of what the afflicted could become, its power was unlike anything the people had ever seen before, and it quickly became apparent that Freysia's power alone wasn't enough to face this scourge. Even as this dire threat approached, however, Phaedon's research continued. The mages within the Verboten Domain made steady strides towards unlocking the secrets of the Blight, as well as ancient magics like the Deathless Pact. With this knowledge, the King's Mage Brigade produced an elixir capable of bestowing immortality upon anyone who drank it. In truth, the elixir was little more than a means of afflicting blight upon humans in controlled substances. It was an imperfect recreation of the Deathless Pact, and slowly deformed the minds and bodies of those who partook, but it would have to suffice. The Blighted Lord was coming, and Land's End was nearly out of time. The twin spires at the kingdom's northern front would become their bastion. There, the most elite warriors in Land's End would gather to confront their enemy head-on. Garrett, the Elder Warrior, said to be the strongest knight to have ever lived. Knight Captain Julius, the king's own bastard son seeking to prove himself to his father. Ulf, the Mad Knight, a warrior with a gentle heart hidden beneath a cold and ruthless exterior. Silva, the White Priestess's own guardian, who fought to protect not just her charge, but her own sister, Sigrid. Lastly, even Hainer, the Dark Executioner, lurked in the shadows of the bastion, ready to lash out at the kingdom's foes with daggers in the dark. Behind them stood Freysia, the White Priestess of the Fount, tasked with purifying the supposed source of the Blight once and for all. These champions, as well as the other soldiers gathered at the bastion, partook of the deathless elixir in hopes of gaining the strength needed to combat the Blighted. As promised, the elixir made them immortal, pitting undying warriors against undying beasts. With their protection, Freysia was able to purify hundreds of Blighted on the battlefield, until the time came to confront the Blighted Lord itself. It was believed that this would be the end of the conflict, but in reality, this act would seal the fate of Land's End. A White Priestess cannot become a Blighted. Though her body may succumb to its effects, her mind and soul will remain pure. This was the truth that the ancients and the people of Land's End clung to as they turned to the White Priestesses for salvation. On that day, this belief was proven wrong. So strong was the fury of the Blighted Lord that even Freysia could do little to stop its festering within her. However, the truth of what she had done, and what she would become, would not make itself evident immediately. All that the people knew for certain was that the Blighted Lord was bested, and the White Priestess was left in poor health in the aftermath. In desperation, Silva brought Freysia to the Verboten domain, hoping that the mages there might be able to offer some sort of cure. For days, weeks, perhaps even months, the White Priestess was confined there, quarantined and studied. To his credit, Phaeton's research was a genuine effort to try and cure the White Priestess of her blight, though that itself was mostly a front. For you see, Phaeton's own lover and assistant Muriel had become blighted not long after they began their work in Verboten domain. His research, whatever intent it may have originally held, became a desperate attempt to restore humanity to the woman he held so dear. Phaeton's research uncovered many truths about the Blight, about the White Priestess, even about life and the soul itself, but none of it could return a blighted to their original form. Even so, Phaeton's research persisted, and, in a way, would become a seed of hope for the kingdom, even if he himself would never realize it. Among the ancient relics he recovered, Phaeton unwittingly unearthed a certain pendant used by the White Priestesses of old, as well as a fractured stone tablet depicting some manner of spell. The pendant was the Aegis Curio, though its power had almost completely faded after so long. The tablet, however, was the key to restoring that power, if only it could be deciphered. Not trusting his king or his fellow researchers, Phaeton hid these relics away until he could make proper use of them, unaware that the chance to do so would never come. These were not the only seeds sown by Phaeton, however. As mentioned before, the heretic's research uncovered many truths about life and souls, and with this knowledge, he discovered a means of creating artificial life. Thus, without her consent, the King's Mage Brigade set to work creating their own White Priestesses from Freysia's flesh. 8 clones were fashioned in Freysia's image, with the intent to purify none other than their own mother, or replace her should the ritual fail. In spite of Freysia's quiet protest, the ritual was set underway, with mages from the Coven and King's Mage Brigade alike overseeing the ritual. It was not enough. The blight within Freysia continued to fester, seeping out slowly but surely as a new blighted lord took root within her. In desperation, Freysia hid herself deep below ground, deeper even than the Verboten domain, in a place known simply as the Abyss. There, she struggled to contain the blight within herself, while the mages above continued on with their abhorrent experiments. Freysia's guardian, Silva, sought to protect her charge from any further harm by drinking the deathless elixir, unaware of the consequences it would impose upon her. The Ersatz priestesses, meanwhile, were taken away and scattered throughout the kingdom. Their individual stories are topics for another time, but in the end, their attempt to purify their mother was unsuccessful. In spite of this, however, the people of Land's End were at peace. After all, the Blighted Lord Ant's hordes had been bested at the Bastion. As far as the general public knew, the threat of the Blight had been quelled, or at least reduced to almost nothing. Then the rain of death began to fall. Unbeknownst to most, Freysia's efforts to contain the Blighted Lord within her had failed. Slowly but surely, its power seeped up from deep below ground, into the very skies above Land's End. The blight fell to the earth as tainted rain, transforming anyone and everyone that it came into contact with. To make matters worse, the heroes of the Twin Spires, those who had taken the deathless elixir to defend the Bastion, had already begun to suffer the side effects. In no time at all, the Blight consumed the kingdom, and those not transformed into monsters themselves were quickly slain by them. As his nation crumbled around him, the king of Land's End hid away in his throne room, relying on the few knights who remained to keep him safe. In an ironic twist of fate, it was the captain of those very knights who marched to the throne room to end the king's life. Witnessing the fate of his comrades and the kingdom he'd sworn himself to protecting, Julius staved off the madness of the elixir just long enough to confront his father face to face. A lifetime seeking approval, only to be ignored to the very last, had brought him here. This, he knew, was the end of Land's End, and all who dwelt within it. As such, Julius chose to spend his final moments as a human seeking revenge against the man who denied him everything, and met his father's gaze for the first time, while plunging a sword into the king's chest. And so, Land's End fell. The reign of death never subsided, and all who remained were either killed or transformed by the Blight. Even the White Priestesses born as copies of Freysia herself would eventually meet their ends, one after another. All but one. Hidden away in a secret room in the White Parish, a lone girl slumbered. The last White Priestess of Land's End, the last child made in Freysia's image, was kept hidden from the scourge of the Blighted. As her kingdom crumbled around her, the girl slept peacefully, and might have forever, until a mysterious voice awoke her. This is where our story begins.